Welcome to this video on price elasticity of demand. Really interesting topic, a favorite with students. There's a lot in here, but I think when you've been taught at your own school, you'll recognize a lot of these ideas, and therefore I'm just going to fine-tune and overview the whole topic. Here we have our 5 introductory learning objectives. It's all about explaining what it is, what it looks like on a diagram, and being able to do a few calculations as well. Remember always what this is intending to measure. It's a responsiveness to a change in price. And so it's all about the quantity changing when there is a change in price. And indeed, any type of elasticity is all about a percentage change in quantity. And there's the formula, therefore, very easy to remember once you put it in symbols. Now, an example here is taking the price of a product like an ice cream cone, and if it goes up 20 cents, and therefore the quantity falls by 2 cones, then what's the price elasticity of demand? How much responsiveness and quantity is happening there? If you've calculated or on a piece of paper using that formula, then you're going to realize that it's the answer is going to be -2, or we can just drop the negative because we know all demand functions are a negative correlation, and that's as simple as how it is to calculate PE. Now, that means it's elastic, that 2 and anything over 1 means that there's a huge amount or a relatively greater amount of percentage change in quantity given to a change in price. And therefore, what it looks like on the diagram is a generally flat curve, as we say, so that if we have an example where the price is going up by $1, in this case, that's a 25% increase, isn't it? 1 over 4, you add it on to 5, but then the quantity dropping 50%, well, that's a price elasticity of 2, and therefore that's price elastic. In the case of inelastic, we see a generally steep curve, and also found at the bottom of curves as well, by the way. And in this case, if we show a similar type of movement of upwards of 25%, but in this case only a 10% decrease in the quantity demanded, then that is a less responsive quantity change, and therefore that's inelastic. Overall, there's 5 types of elasticity, and the low elasticity that we just talked about does mean overall it's less responsive. Therefore, numerically it is less than 1, and we call it price inelastic. And for the elastic type, it's over 1, it's greater than 1, and price elastic. And in the middle, of course, it's unit elasticity, meaning that it's equally responsive. And then we have perfectly elastic, which means it's completely responsive, which really is an unrealistic situation. It's only an extreme idea. What is certainly realistic and possible is perfectly inelastic, meaning that there's no responsiveness to quantity changes when there's a given change in the price for all of those products that are really, really rigid and just totally necessary. So what a unit elastic demand curve looks like is something like that, so that if we see that if there's any change in the price, again 25%, we'll get a 25% decrease in the quantity. And a perfectly inelastic curve, which can be realistic, simply means that there's an increase in the price, and once again that's the same increase of percentage of 25%, but no change in quantity. Vertical, perfectly horizontal means it's an infinite number, and that's what it looks like. There's nothing more to say. It's totally unrealistic. Now, interestingly enough, though we said all of that, of what these shapes look like, in fact, any PED curve, straight line curve, actually varies in PED value along the whole curve. So in fact, while we could say that a flat curve tends to be price elastic, any curve any straight line demand curve at the high end is going to be high PED, and that's because you're going to have relatively small percentage changes in price there, and this with the small amount of quantity, you're going to have that means really a higher percentage occurring, and the low end of the scale of the curve, which is easy to remember, will be low PED, and of course right in the middle is going to be unit elasticity. So that's every demand curve. That's this. Now, what determines different elasticities for products? As you've already been thinking, I'm sure that if there's a lot of substitutes that are close, and therefore people can actually easily respond to changes in price by switching to the other product, that's where you're going to get high price elasticity. And whether or not it's a luxury or a necessity, so that if it is a luxury item and it goes up in price, indeed there's going to be a huge responsiveness there, or if there's something that people find as a luxury but it goes on sale, then they may be able to start affording it in large amounts. Proportion of income spent. Now we all realize that if we're looking for a ballpoint pen and if the price goes up 10 or 20%, it really doesn't matter because it's a low percentage of income. But the high price ticket items are going to be very responsive because it tends to be a bigger percentage of one's income. And how soon can you change? For example, if you do want to change to solar power heating, then it'll take a while to get that in place if the price of other types of heating goes up. So that does require a time frame for people. If suddenly the price of petrol goes up and you don't want to drive to work anymore, it's going to take a while to find an alternative. So it's just a time frame issue there, and the degree of durability or repair. How easily can you repair the products? If that's tends to be quite easily done, then people will go for that option instead of buying a new refrigerator or stove or bicycle or car. They'll repair their old one instead if the price goes up. So that's pretty much all about PED and the basic theory, and indeed how narrowly defined is as good as another good example, which minute. But what we can do here is do a little further practice to just get your idea around PED a little bit better. You just think of products, justify what their elasticity would be, and if you can illustrate that, then that would be a very good way of understanding the concept. Now, further, what you have to do is apply PED in the real world. This is where it gets really interesting, that we're thinking about what does this implication have for firms when they make pricing, marketing decisions. Very key for business. And for countries that are exporting commodities versus manufactured goods, this has a whole implication for the income of the entire country or even an industry when there are changes in prices, and then therefore governments and when they apply taxes. But we won't look at that here because we'll take that up when we look at government taxes. In general, you have to realize that if total revenue is going to be the amount that producers are earning, this is not profits, it's just the total amount of what they're going to earn. And then that's going to be obviously going to be how much each price is, the price is, and how many they're selling. And therefore your formula is price times the quantity. That's going to be the total revenue. Now, in this case here, if you take a look at the left-hand diagram, at price $4, the revenue would be $200. And but at price $5, the revenue is only $100 because of the elastic demand situation. You get a huge decrease in quantity demanded, and therefore, if that's the case, a firm that raises the price for a product whose product is price elastic, they're going to suffer a loss in revenue. However, keep in mind that the reverse would also be true in this case, that if the firm were to decrease the price, so let's go for a decrease on the right-hand side, first of all, from $5 down to $4, go from the right to the left diagram, there'll be an increase in revenue. In the case of an inelastic demand curve, as we see here, we have once again an increase in the price from the left from $1 to $3 on the right, and there's an increase in revenue. So there you go, very happy scenario, only because the PED is inelastic. But if we were to actually decrease the price, and firms who are selling an inelastic product think, oh, well, let's have a sale, they're actually going to lose revenue because consumers with a necessity product, let's say, or there isn't much other choice anyway, they're buying as much of the product as they actually want to at $3. They're not going to increase their quantity that much more if the price goes down to $1. So only going from 80 to 100 in quantity is not going to bring in more revenue, it'll bring in less. So this is the basic understanding of what you need to have in order to apply examples of what would be a smart thing to do for businesses, for industries, and for firms, for whole nations in what they export. Here's a nice little summary of all those changes. You've got basically 4 types of situations, and you can reflect on that when you have more time. Now here's a good example just to explain the difference about agricultural primary products compared to manufactured products. Here we have, and quite often we have, greater productivity happening in lots of primary products, like in this case wheat. And if that's the case, then supply would be increasing. As much as it might be an inelastic supply, because it takes a while for new wheat crops to come into existence, but because wheat is a definite necessity for products that rely on wheat as an ingredient, it's PED inelastic, and that's the key point. Primary products tend to be price inelastic, where manufactured products with lots of substitutes are going to be price elastic. In this case, with price inelastic, an increase in the supply curve means that the price will be a huge drop. You see, because of that vertical demand curve, or that very steep demand curve, then there's actually going to be a huge drop off in the price when the supply increases. And with not much increase in the quantity demanded, what's going to happen to revenue? Take a look at those revenue boxes. The very first one here on the upper left is a large decrease, and what you gain in the lower right box is not very much in compensation. So there's overall decrease in revenue. So that's a problem when you think farmers have good news. Another situation is about petrol. And I think a lot of people can be pretty cynical about the rise in price of petrol for good reason. Price inelastic in the market because it's a necessity for cars, can't make a switch very much in the short term anyway, and the price goes from $1 to $3, they'll make a huge increase in revenue. However, for the single firm that tries to go on its own, what would happen is they have an elastic demand curve, because compared to firms around the city, then cars can go into any petrol station. They're very close substitutes. So a price going from $4 to $5 for one firm, they are going to lose out on revenue because they're going to lose customers to other petrol stations, and the revenue will decrease. So it's very important to keep that in mind, which is why it's a smart thing to undercut your other petrol firms around the city or country. You get people coming in because you've got the lowest price of a very closely competitive product. But this concept gets taken up later on. We look at oligopoly in theory of the firm to explain how it gets a bit even trickier than this. There we go. And just for a little practice, think about how taxi drivers might alter their taxi fares between daytime and nighttime. because of the changing PED. Well, I hope you found this informative and a good review for you on PED. Thanks for